Okay, so what I'm going to show you next is how to do the techniques so that you'll be able to show the students. Hopefully you can see everything. There we go. Okay, so again you're going to be using your paint palette and your mixing tray. You're just going to have to trust me that I'm using my mixing tray because I can't get it all in the shot. So I'm going to start off with flat wash. So flat wash is primarily what you did here for your the basis of wet into wet, and I'm going to do all of these using primary colours, but if you want to use secondary colours or you want to have a go at mixing tertiary colours, then you can. Make sure that you start with clean water and check that the brushes are clean as well. So I'm going to put water onto my paper exactly the same way as I would have done with mixing wet into wet. Now, because I've written my titles first so that you can see which technique I'm doing, I've got to be really careful with my paint, because if I'm not, I'm going to smudge everything that I've written. So you might want to write your titles in afterwards. Okay, so for a flat wash, I'm going to take my colour. I'm going to take red. I'll mix some water into it, so hopefully you can see here, quite flowy. And then I'm taking my brush and I'm just moving my brush across the box, trying to control it, but this will be what you would use to put your base colours in for your Marion Bolognese work. So you try not to change the tone of the wash, it's just one colour all the way down, nice and flat. So you would use this, for example, maybe around the eyelids or on the cheekbones, and probably when highlighting the nose. So that's a flat wash. If you find you start to get little bubbles on your paper, that's perfectly okay. It's because the paper we're working on is cartridge paper and you're basically roughing the surface. It's the same thing that happens when you get bubbles on your jumper. It won't hurt your painting, just don't overwork it, because if you do, you'll end up with a hole in the paper. Don't try to pick them off either, because you end up picking a hole in your work. The next thing that I'm going to do is down onto this square, which is wet on dry, and that's purely so it's got time to dry by the time I get to it. So for this one, I'm going to take the yellow and I'm going to use it out of the tin. Now again, let me wash that out. I'm going to put some water into the box first, because this just helps your paint to flow more smoothly, and it means you don't get a variation in the paint. I'm going to demonstrate after some dry brushing, just so you can see the difference, because some of you might want to use it. So I'm taking my yellow, I've got water in my palette. It's quite a strong yellow. You can make it weaker if you want to. I want to keep it like this so it will show up on the example. And again, my brush strokes are following the same way. If you were painting in your eye, which you'll demonstrate for you later, you'll see that I'm following that curve of the surface of the eye to get the contours. Okay, so I'm going to leave that square to dry, so I'm not going back to it for a little bit. The next one I'm going to do is a graded or a variegated wash. So for this one, I'm just going to put the water at the top here and then fade it out as it gets to the bottom. I'm going to take some of my blue that's in my palette. So again, I'm using the Prussian blue. If you want it a little thicker, you can take it straight from the paint tray. And I'm going to put my colour on, and you can see that it will start to burst as soon as you put it on to the square. So if I wanted it darker still, I could layer up more pigment at the top there, so it's really, really, really dark. This is a good colour to do your example with, because you can really see the variation as it goes down. So then all I'm going to do is add more water to this part, and moving it side to side, I'm bringing the colour down the box. So all I'm doing is adding more and more water, and what you should see, hopefully, she says, is that as you get to the end of the box, your colour's getting lighter and lighter and lighter. If I carried on going, I'd just end up with white. If you overdo it, and you can show this to the students as well, if you overdo it and you've run out of room, you can take a tissue and just lift out some of that which will give you a clue as to what this is down here later on. So just add in the water so you get lighter and lighter and lighter. Okay, so that's a graded or a variegated wash. If you're watching the video that's included in the PowerPoint, she refers to it as variegated. Okay, gradation, variegation, it's the same thing. So the next thing is a blended graded wash. This is really similar to your wet into wet technique. So for this, again, I'm putting the water onto the surface. Okay, and then I'm going to take my primary colour. So for this one I'm going to use a yellow and pop that on the top, and you can see that it's starting to spread already because I've got some of the water on there. And then underneath I'm going to use some of the Prussian blue. I'm just using the tip of my paintbrush because this stuff spreads really well. It's a lot more dominant than the yellow. So then I'll work my brush backwards and forwards, and you'll see I'll get the green tone. And then what I'm going to do is add more water to it to blend it down, so you'll see I'll get the variegation in there as well. And again, I'm running out of room here to make it go lighter and lighter, but if I carried on going, you can see there I've cut my label, so you're going to get some pink into it now. I can lift it out with a tissue just to control the water if it's over wet. Okay, so that's my blended graded wash. I'm just going to put some more water in here. And then bring that down. Okay. So this technique you might want to use when you come to blending colours around the eyes. So these ones you might use as a base, and then these ones you might use for blending your colours, and this is when you might hold your page up so that you can get the drips. So if I'm not, I can just about do it on here, but if I tilt that up you can see it starts to flow down, you can see this, the paint starts to move. Okay, so this second one, or rather this fourth one, you are definitely going to need to use. This is blooms. So I'm going to start off with a flat wash, and I'm going to go back to my red. I just need to mix some more of it because it's dried out a little bit and it's not as thick as I want it to be. Okay, that's a bit better. So for these ones I'm using what the American lady refers to as a thirsty brush, which means you squeeze in some of the water out as you go. It just helps you to get better blooms. I'm moistening the surface, and you can see I need to change my paint water because it's starting to have a little bit of colour to it. So then I squeeze my brush out a little bit, and then I'm going to take some of my colour and I'm going to put that on as a flat wash. And again I'm controlling where this will go. So you might use this, as I said earlier, for the nose or to highlight around the eyes or the cheekbones. So the next part I'm going to show you is blooms. Now this technique is really nice, but you have to do it while this part is still wet. You don't want to over wet your paper, so if it dries out you can re-wet it, but just don't over soak it. Don't put too much water onto it because you'll find that you develop like a white patch. I'm exaggerating it here so you can see it, but if you put too much water on you'll end up with like a weird tonal thing happening, which you might like, but for the purposes of the demonstration we don't want. So then I'm going to add my bloom colour over the top. So I'm going to use my yellow. Now you could do this with secondaries, you could do this with tertiaries, and I'm using my brush point down. I need to add a little bit more water to my yellow. You want it quite watery. Okay, and you should be able to see that when it hits the paper it starts to spread. I'm going to do one in the blue just so it shows up a little more clearly. Now your blooms you are going to want to use when it comes to layering colours over the top of one another. So for example around the eyes, and to create a larger bloom you can use the brush on its side. And again, if I tip my paper up I'll be able to get the bloom to flow, which will create the tear drops or the smudges that Bolognese uses in her work. I'm just going to give it a little tap to get it to go. You're going to go. Doesn't want to move. If you're struggling when it comes to getting the bloom to flow, just put a little bit of water on and then give it a little tap, and it should, she says, want to dab. You can see it's starting to move. Okay, just a note here, if the kids blend all of the colours together, what you'll end up with is brown. You can see it coming here, so try and limit them to using just one or two colours when they're experimenting with their different techniques. So the next one that I'm going to show you is lifting out. So I'm going to take some of my blue, I think. So I'll put my water on first, and then I'm going to take some of my blue and I'm going to put that on. Now you can see it's a lot lighter here as a flat wash than it is here, but lifting out you can do with blended graded washes, you can do with variegated washes, you can do it onto dry. So there's different ways of doing lifting out. You can do it with a tissue, and while the surface is still wet you can lift out the colour. So hopefully you can see there where I've lifted it out. So if the kids do make a mistake, or if they want to create an area that's lighter, you should be able to see there where I've lifted it out. Equally, you can do lifting out with your paintbrush. Now to demonstrate this, I'm just going to make one area just slightly dark. I'm going to put a little bit more paint into it so that you can see where I'm about to lift it out with my paintbrush. So I'm going to make this bit a little bit darker. Then I'm going to rinse my brush and make it so it's as dry as I can get it. So there shouldn't be any water on it at all. And then I'm going to take my paintbrush and put it on. And actually what your paintbrush does is absorb the paint and the water and lifts it out to create a negative. So if they have made a little bit of an error, or if they want to create highlights, for example, on the inside of the pupil, in the eye, on the iris, sorry, they'll be able to lift it out because it sucks the water up. So you get these areas in negativity. Okay, so the last one that I'm going to show you that's on the sheet is wet onto dry. So I've painted my yellow and that's dry now. So with watercolours, it's the ability to be able to work in layers and understanding that if you want the colours to flow together, you would use it with while it's wet. So you, here, for example, with the blooms, I'm just going to go back into one of my blooms because they've dried out a little bit and I want you to be able to see it working. They've blended a little. Just put a bit more water into that, so you can see it sort of starbursting and popping onto the surface. There we go. Okay, so for wet onto dry is literally like a Ron Seal advert. It does what it says on the tin. You've got your dry paint, then you're going to put your wet paint onto the top of it. Now because it's dried, it shouldn't spread, so it will behave in the same way as it did on your colour wheel, and like here with your wet onto wet where it blends into one another. So the paint will stay where I put it. And so they'll need this technique when they're coming to put the detail in the eye. So you can see here, I'm going to use some of the paint straight from the tin, that where I put my blue paint is where it stays. So if I want to, I can add a little bit more water and I can blend it out, and because the yellow is my base colour, I'll end up with the green underneath, but it's not spreading, it's not blending out, it's not bleeding into one another, it's still quite controlled. So you're going to want to use this technique when it comes to adding detail to the pupil and also the eyelashes of the eye. If I wanted to blend this out, what I could do is using a wet paintbrush at the edge, just go around the edge of one side and it will reactivate the yellow, and you'll be able to see that it starts to blur out. So then it turns back into almost a blended wash. I've only done that on half the side so you can see. I'll blend that out and then blend it back into the yellow. So when you're doing a graded wash, you don't always have to go back to the white, you can go back to the yellow. Just added some more yellow here to layer that up. So you can see how your watercolours will work for getting detail. Now the one thing that's not included on the sheet is dry brush work, and you might want to get the kids to practice this. So for dry brush, you take a thirsty brush, which means there's hardly any water on it, and you take your colour and you use it almost neat on your paper. And you should find with dry brush that you can see your brush marks within it. So I'm doing it within the yellow, but you can see it's very thick. So if you want your kids to do this, that's fine, I'm happy for you to do it, but you might want to get them to do this on another piece of paper, so you can get them to do it as an extension task if you wanted to, and then you could get them to experiment with combining the different techniques together. So that would be an extension task, and you can get them to draw out the boxes onto paper and play around with layering things together. What does it look like if you combine lifting out with blooms? What does it look like if you put a flat wash and then you put a graded blended wash over the top, that kind of thing. So just to finish off with a wet onto dry, because I've blended it out there for the purposes of showing you, but if I was to do it with a student, I'd just get them to have the box of yellow colour and then put the next colour over the top. And I'm using very little water with my paint at the moment, so you can see it doesn't blend. Okay, so you can layer your colours up in that way. Right then, so that's it for watercolour painting techniques. I hope it explained everything. I'm just going to label this one up as dry brush so that you know exactly what I've done. Okay, and yeah, have fun with it, make sure you practice it. You can use this video if you want in class, but obviously it's more aimed at you guys, so if you want to use it, go ahead, but please make sure you practice the techniques, and if you've got any questions, come and speak to us. Thank you very much. I'm going to go on to do the demonstration of how to do the Marion Bolognese eyes. Bye!